My focus over the past, well, since the pandemic really, I think we've all had a lot of time on our hands to figure out all those dream things that we didn't have enough time for because we're so busy every single day, to finally say, let me go and make a pick list and figure it out. So one of the things that I really got into that I always wanted to figure out taking a larger scale to was the whole idea of natural fermentations, natural leavening. I got myself my first grain mill, and you know, really seeing what happens when we add fresh grain into our dough. And it's something, it's magic. I can't see any other way. If when we get into this, talking about dough, you're talking about enzymes, right? And you've got all of these natural enzymes, alpha and beta amylase is what they call them. And they're all located on the exterior of the grain, in the bran, right? And all of a sudden, you could take 5–10% of that fresh ground grain, add it into your flour mix. I'm gonna say it's like putting Viagra in your dough. It's no other way. All of a sudden, you see this cell structure explode. And it's happening naturally because we've harnessed those enzymes. We're not killing them, right? And this is where, to me, saying, how do we take this and go and commercialize it? Make it so that every pizzeria can do this every single day. Let's get away from the brand name on the flour and let's figure out what's actually inside that bag. All of a sudden, that's where the magic happens. We don't want to see an ingredient list of 35 things on that flour label, because what are they doing? They're making something happen that's not natural. And I think for our customers, for people that we consider now our family because they're trusting us enough to feed them, all of a sudden it's like, I want to give them the best experience, the best flavor, and you're going to be doing something totally different than everybody else has done. So, long answer, I've been grinding a lot of grain and looking at what different kinds of grain have different reactions, and it's just flavor-wise, structure-wise, and there's so many beautiful things just coming out of that. The subject is tinkering, right? So all of a sudden, you go on social media and you see all these pizza guys talking about 3-day bulk cold fermentations in 5 days and 7 days, but it's really important to understand what you need to be the support system of those doughs. Because as fermentation happens, we're breaking that dough down naturally. It's a good thing, but also if you don't know how to grab the reins, right, it can be destructive. Because if you use, let's say, a flour that's made for making Neapolitan pizza, right, low protein. Everyone talks about high gluten, high protein flour, right? We're talking about something lower protein, something maybe in the 11.5% protein range, right? Do you guys think that you can take that same flour and say, I'm going to get 96 hours out of that dough? Absolutely not. If you look at that dough ball in 96 hours, when it's sitting inside your dough box, you'll notice these big giant bubbles, probably directly in the middle or just to the right or left of the middle point. If you're today going into your pizza shop and opening up your dough boxes and you see that that's what your dough ball looks like, if you're having problems with structure, things like the dough maybe looks a little gummy inside, things that are all in that nature of the dough collapsing as it rises, it's 100% because you're not using the right flour for the process that you're trying to create. The longer fermentation that we go, the heavier the flour we need to start building. So those of you using heavier flours, 14% protein, right? There's lots of American mills, great stuff, like, you know, the General Mills All Trumps of the world and the Kairos and all those high protein flours. You need something like that if you're planning to go 72, 96 hours or longer, right? But if you're only going to say, in my pizzeria, I'm looking at a dough that needs to go 24 to 48 hours, you absolutely don't want to go as heavy as possible. You want to start going a little bit lower, because the lower that you can go and that balance between fermentation and strength of flour, all of a sudden you're going to find where the happy place is. 48 hours maybe with a 13% protein. People in the world right now are using tons of patent flour. I'm seeing patent flour. All the Detroit pizza guys, right? we're looking at something 12.5%, 13% protein. And when you look at that dough that's rising somewhere between 3/4 to an inch high, and you got those gorgeous, beautiful cell structure in there, if you make the same exact dough with a heavier flour, you see that it looks more compact. It eats very heavy, right? So the flour weight is really critical to that long fermentation process. Why do we even like long fermentation? You get a lot of flavor. You get a lightness to the dough because we're consuming all of those heavy starches from the flour. At the end of the day, that's really what the game is. How do we make a better dough? Make your dough light by picking the right ingredient. And that would probably be my number one thing that I would say is a mistake, especially by new people. When they come in and they start seeing all of these different flours in the world. Yeah, there's the cool kids on the block that are using and they're promoting certain flours. But it's really important to also say, why am I using this? And what are the benefits of these different types of things? What is fermentation? Fermentation has nothing to do with time. Fermentation is specifically yeast consuming sugar. And what happens when yeast consume sugar? We create ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is what causes our dough to rise, right? What's maturation? Maturation is the time from the dough being created until the time that that dough goes into the oven. Maturation has to do with time. Fermentation has to do with a chemical reaction consuming sugar to create air. That's simple. Let's just call it fat, right? Because in my Chicago dough, right, I use lard. I love to use lard in my dough. And then, you know, as a kid, you know, we started getting a little older and, oh, I can't use lard anymore, right? So we switched to, you know, shortening. Shortening, oh, trans fats, we can't talk about that anymore. So we went to the next healthiest option, which was corn oil, right? Love the dough with corn oil in it. Beautiful flavor. Well, corn oil wasn't good anymore. We all switched to canola then, right? And then canola, then, you know, Wolfgang Puck came out and everybody's putting olive oil and everything, right? But the dough that still you go back to today doesn't have to be only one kind of fat. You can make a beautiful dough. Cut it half with olive oil, half with butter, right? Use unsalted butter because it'll change your salt on your dough. You could take, you know, again, straight lard. You can use lard and olive oil. Make your own blend. But the idea is that when you measure out what your total weight of oil is going to be, don't go around that, right? Make it a part of that total number. Salt is critical to making dough, right? Because salt will inhibit fermentation. It'll slow things down. If you make a dough without salt in it, right, you'll see that that dough is going to be a lot more active. The other thing that salt does, it also helps develop gluten, right? Tuscany has a very famous bread that's made with no salt in it, right? And when you see that process of being kneaded by hand and made and it proofs up and all that, it's a very specific process to make that dough. So putting no salt at all in your dough will change things. Now, I'm one of those firm believers. I only use sea salt, kosher salt, those kinds of things. If you're still using the stuff in the blue can, you've probably seen me joke about it. Like I only use that stuff on my driveway when it snows. But it was a big thing back in the day that we were using iodized salt, right? And it has a certain effect on our dough. It's about the way that it dissolves and the way that gluten develops. It's really important to remember that these are all things over the years, trial and error, that we started to discover. And that's, I think, for you guys, as you start playing around, get yourself a notebook. Keep it with you with a pen all the time. If you're going to make a brand new dough, the best thing I can tell you is document everything. Write it down. Get yourself a digital thermometer. If you're making dough without a thermometer, I'm going to tell you you're 100% doing it wrong. Because time and temperature have the greatest effect on our dough that we can look at, right? The warmer that dough is, the faster that yeast is moving, and the faster that dough is going to rise. So if we're trying to grab the reins and we want to go 72, 96 hours, are we going to do it grandma style like my grandmother Sunday morning, 7 a.m., mixing active yeast and hot water and all this stuff because she wanted the pizza ready in a few hours? No, we're going to go the other side. We're going to go as cold as possible and maybe even use ice water. It's important to document what your temperature was, because if you document the successes and your failures, I could probably tell you I've probably got way more failures than I do successes. But when you have that first success and you're like, man, this is slap your mom, it's so good. I would really tell you that it's great to be able to go back into those notes and say, wow, my water temperature was here. This was the type of flour I used. This is the oven that I baked it in. And that's where you're going to make it repeatable. And I guess at the end of the day, it's really making it repeatable. We open a pizzeria with the idea that, yeah, we want to make a couple pizzas and feed some people. But then once you're in the grind 7 days a week, it's like, man, I want to build an empire, right? I'll tell you what, man, everybody that's built an empire, we all go back to the basics, no matter what point they're in. And that's really, really important. Change one thing at a time. If you're going to play with your dough recipe, all of a sudden you change something, you adjust the yeast, you adjust the water, the temperature, you don't know what worked and what didn't work. So when you do a test, do a simple test. Change one thing, document what it did. Did it do what you wanted? Are you going to make a change? The right side of the column, mark, this is my notes, this is what I'm going to do on the next variation. To be able to make a dough today and then say, huh, I remember I did something 2 years ago. That's pretty cool to go back and, because you're going to forget everything, right? And go back and look at it.